Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And wow, um, today we're going to be looking at something really interesting and
Yeah.
a little bit complex, I think.
Yeah.
We're talking about artificial general intelligence, or AGI for short,
Great.
and we've got some pretty fascinating sources that you've brought to the table today.
Yes.
We've got a blog post from Astral Codex 10
Mm-hmm.
by Scott Alexander. We've got an article from World, and we've even got some website copy from an AI company called IGO. So this should be interesting.
It really should be. I mean, these sources kind of paint a picture of AGI as this, force with incredible potential, but there are some significant costs too.
Yeah, that's what really jumped out at me as I was looking at this stuff.
Yeah.
It's just how expensive this is becoming.
Right.
I mean, I remember when we first started training, simple AIs and stuff,
Yeah.
and it seemed revolutionary, but the cost was practically nothing.
Well, yeah, GPT-1 was practically free to train, but as these models have gotten more and more complex,
Right.
the financial investment has just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
I mean, GPT-4 cost $100 million to train.
It's unbelievable.
And if Scott Alexander's analysis is right, he thinks that each new GPT model is about 30 times larger than the last.
Wow.
So if that trend continues,
Okay.
we can expect that cost to just multiply.
So you're talking about GPT-6 costing upwards of $75 billion.
Potentially, yeah. And GPT-7, we'd be talking trillions.
Trillions of dollars.
Yeah. I mean, where is all this money even coming from?
Right, because that's more than some countries' GDPs. I mean, this is just a massive amount of money.
It is, and it's interesting because Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently requested $7 trillion in funding for future AI projects.
Wow.
And, this is particularly interesting given his previous stance on this idea of compute overhang, where he basically argued that future progress in AI wouldn't just be about throwing more computing power at the problem.
Right.
So this request for $7 trillion seems to kind of contradict that.
Yeah, so is he having a change of heart? Or is there something we're missing here?
It's hard to say, but it definitely makes you wonder if even the people who are leading AI development are grappling with just how many resources are really going to be needed to achieve AGI.
But I think it's really important to remember, too, that all of this computing power comes at a cost, not just financially, but environmentally.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking massive energy consumption here.
I mean, just to give you an idea, training GPT-4 used 50 gigawatt hours of electricity.
Gosh.
That's about half of the output of the world's largest power plant in a single session.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and, as these models get even bigger and more complex,
Right.
that energy demand is only going to increase.
So are we even going to be able to sustain this,
That's a really good question.
as we move forward with AGI?
Yeah, what are the implications for climate change? I mean,
Yeah.
these are serious concerns.
And then I think what really struck me as I was looking at this article from World was the focus on rare earth elements,
Yeah.
which are essential for all this high-powered computing.
Right.
But the way they're extracted is fraught with ethical complexities.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really troubling situation.
Especially, the article really focused on the reliance on child labor in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, the conditions in these mines are often just horrific.
Yeah.
Workers, many of them children, are working in these dangerous conditions with hand tools, exposed to toxic chemicals.
Yeah.
It's really a sobering reminder that the quest for, technological advancement can come at a really steep human cost.
Absolutely. It's a very difficult truth to confront.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you have this incredible promise of AGI,
Right.
with potential to really revolutionize countless aspects of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, we have this dark underbelly of exploitation and environmental damage
Yeah.
that's really fueling it all.
It's a real moral dilemma.
Absolutely.
Someone that we have to think long and hard about.
Yeah. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and discuss some of the potential solutions, or at least ways to think about this problem.
I mean, it really forces us to ask, can we really justify these advancements if they come at the expense of human suffering and environmental degradation?
Yeah. I mean, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to address this?
Well, there's no easy answers, but the World article did point to some efforts being made to try to improve conditions in these mines.
Yes.
Some companies are starting to explore, more sustainable mining practices and trying to eliminate child labor from their supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
It's a systemic problem.
Yeah.
It really requires a global effort to tackle this.
And I think, we as consumers have a role to play here too, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're the ones driving the demand for this technology.
We are.
I mean, if we're all clamoring for the latest and greatest AI,
right,
then that's going to fuel the need for these rare earth elements.
It does. And I think consumers have a lot of power here.
Yeah.
They can demand greater transparency from companies about their sourcing practices and, make a conscious effort to support companies that are committed to ethical and sustainable operations.
So it's about, using our purchasing power to kind of incentivize change in the industry.
Exactly. I mean, it's about voting with our wallets and saying, we want AGI, but we want it to be developed ethically.
Yeah, we don't want it to come at the cost of, people and the planet.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting how, the future of AGI is so intertwined with our own choices as consumers.
It really is. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the values that we kind of embed in its development and its deployment.
But even beyond the ethical concerns, there are also questions about just how sustainable this approach to AGI development really is in the long term.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, Scott Alexander, in his blog post, he talks about this concept of data overhang, which is basically the idea that we might be approaching a limit on the amount of data that's available to train these massive models.
That's right. I mean, there's only so much text and images and code out there in the world.
So even if we could afford the financial and environmental costs,
right,
we might just hit a wall where there's simply not enough data to keep feeding these AI behemoths.
Right. I mean, think about it. We're scraping the entire internet for data.
Right.
But at some point, are we going to run out?
And what happens then?
Well, that's a good question. And it's got people thinking about alternative approaches to developing AGI.
Like what?
Well, one idea that's being explored is using synthetic data.
Synthetic data?
Yeah, basically having AI generate its own training data.
So instead of scraping the internet for text and images,
right,
the AI would just create its own learning material.
Exactly. It's kind of like a self-sufficient student.
But can AI-generated data really be as good as, real-world data?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, for certain tasks like image recognition or game-playing, synthetic data has shown some promise.
Okay.
But when it comes to, really complex things like language understanding and reasoning, it's not clear yet whether AI can truly replicate all of the nuances and the complexities of human language and thought.
So that's kind of a potential roadblock then.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, if AI can't generate really high-quality data,
right,
how will it continue to learn and evolve?
And this is where some AI companies are coming in with alternative approaches.
Exactly.
Like this company Igo that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, they're interesting.
They're arguing that the key to achieving AGI is not just about brute force computation.
Right.
It's about really understanding, the fundamental principles of human intelligence.
That's what they're saying.
So they call their approach cognitive AI. As opposed to kind of the statistical AI that powers these large language models.
Right. So instead of just building bigger and bigger models, they're suggesting that we need to build smarter models.
Smarter models.
Yeah, models that are inspired by the way our own brains work.
Okay, that's fascinating.
It is.
And so Igo believes that by kind of mimicking human cognitive processes, these cognitive AI systems will require significantly less data and energy to train.
And they'll be able to learn and adapt continuously.
So it's like we've been so focused on building, a bigger hammer that we haven't stopped to think about whether a hammer is even the right tool for this job.
Exactly. And this cognitive AI approach is definitely intriguing.
It is, but is there any evidence that it can actually deliver on its promises?
Well, that's what we need to look into now.
Yeah.
Let's dive into Igo's claims and see if this cognitive AI really has the potential to overcome some of these challenges.
Okay, let's do it. So we've got these massive financial and environmental costs, associated with the way we're developing AGI right now.
Right.
And we're kind of exploring this idea of cognitive AI as a potential alternative path.
Right.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, their website doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty technical details.
Okay.
But they're really emphasizing this idea of building AI systems that can learn and reason more like humans do.
Okay.
So it's about moving away from these purely statistical models that rely on these huge data sets and instead, trying to understand those underlying cognitive mechanisms that drive human thought.
So instead of just recognizing patterns in data, they would actually be able to understand the meaning behind it.
That's the idea.
That sounds like a huge leap.
It would be a huge leap. And, IGO claims that this approach would not only be more efficient in terms of data and energy consumption, but also more adaptable and robust.
Okay.
They even suggest that cognitive AI could eventually lead to systems that have common sense and, a genuine understanding of the world.
It makes you wonder if they're maybe overselling it a little bit.
Well, it's good to be skeptical, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a compelling idea.
It is.
But there's still so much that we don't understand about our own brains.
Right.
So try to translate that those complexities into a functional AI system.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a monumental task.
So are we putting all our eggs in this cognitive AI basket?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, there are other interesting developments happening in computing that could potentially help alleviate some of these pressures.
Like what?
Well, one example is neuromorphic computing.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
So that's where they're basically drawing inspiration from the structure of the human brain to create more efficient chips.
Right. So instead of using traditional transistors, these neuromorphic chips use artificial neurons and synapses to process information more like our brains do.
And because they operate in a more parallel and interconnected way, they can do these complex tasks with a lot less energy.
Potentially. Yeah. I mean, that could be a game changer.
Yeah, for both the financial and environmental costs. Yeah. So it sounds like we're kind of entering this whole new era of computing.
Yeah.
Where, inspiration from biology is leading to these breakthroughs in technology.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it makes me optimistic that we might actually find solutions to these challenges.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely an exciting time to be following all of this.
Absolutely.
But, even though the future of AGI is still uncertain, I think one thing is clear.
What's that?
We need to be really careful and really think about, the ethical implications and the environmental impacts of our choices.
Well said. I think we've really uncovered some thought-provoking insights today.
We have.
From the just astronomical costs of training these massive AI models to the ethical concerns around, rare earth mining and this search for more sustainable and efficient computing.
Absolutely.
It's clear that, the path to AGI is not a simple one.
It's not.
But I think it's a journey worth taking.
Definitely.
As long as we do it thoughtfully.
Thoughtfully and responsibly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well said. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
Yes.
Until next time.